Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we have a Kickstarter preview for Robin Hood and the Merry Men. This is from Final Frontier Games, the makers of Cavern Tavern, and most recently Rise of Nobility.
This one is a beast. It is a worker placement game for 2 to 4 players. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's actually a cooperative game mixed with a competitive game.
Yes.
And it takes place in the Robin Hood mythology. Each player has a very unique hero in front of them that gives them unique player powers. However, the crux of the game is moving your merry men onto these various worker placement spots and taking actions and then trying to avoid the sheriff.
Yeah, that whole sort of competitive, cooperative sort of thing going on has a lot of theme built around it. The theme fits really, really well, and you'll see it all over the board.
Yep. The game can actually end in 3 different ways. If the players survive through 5 rounds, you're simply going to add up all the victory points. There's a lot of ways to score victory points in the game. Or you can actually have all the players lose. If one of the 4 roads, these are roads where characters are going to move into the city, kind of where the sheriff is taxing the people and bringing the money back to himself. If any of these roads don't have any silver pennies left on them, the players will lose. And if any of the 6 gathering spots is filled with the sheriff's henchmen, the players will lose. So you're trying to avoid that through the course of the game by cooperating.
Yeah, you definitely have to do that. You can't coast through this game and just look out for number 1. You're going to have to do things to help others. And in fact, there's a lot of opportunities to score victory points when you do that.
This is a prototype version, so I should just say that now. A lot of the components will probably obviously change before the end game comes out. However, in its state, it looks really good.
Yeah.
So the game board, it's a massive game board. This game board has the city in the center. This is the castle. The castle has a number of different locations that workers can go into. Around the city, you have gathering sites. There are 6 gathering sites. Each of these gathering sites provides a very specific resource, requires a specific number of weapon dice to fight the sheriff's men, and then each one has 4 hideouts around it where you can kind of sneak your merry men in to gain bonus actions compared to just the common actions with them.
Yeah, it's really interesting because like Jeremy said, these places are spots that you can go to for a very basic resource, but in this game, you're not just going there with a standard worker, you're going there with your merry men who are going to be powered by a variety of different cards. And some of those, depending on how you use them, might be able to get you a little bit more from some of those spots.
The castle itself has an area where you can rob from the rich. On the left side, it has an archery grounds where your hero can go to compete in archery tournaments. And on the right has a prison. This is where arrested merry men are going to go, and you have to go break them out of prison, or else they could be hung by the sheriff.
This board is dripping in theme, but the castle in particular has a lot of the same things you see in any Robin Hood movie or any Robin Hood story.
You have a scoring track around the outside of the board. On the left-hand side of the board, you have a number of different areas. This is the reputation track. The reputation track will move up through the course of the game, giving you multipliers for traps and barricades and envoys that you've placed through the course of the game. You have a carriage track over here. This is where carriages that you've either robbed or have made their way all the way into the city will occupy. And over here you have a bunch of worker placement spots. Some of these worker placement spots are just for merry men. Anytime you see a flag, that's a merry men spot. Anytime you see Robin Hood's hat, that is a place for one of the heroes. These spots will allow you to do a number of different things. One of them is for envoys, one of them is to build barricades, one of them is to build traps, and then a place to craft additional dice, because you will be drafting some of these for free at the start of each of the hero phases. So let's talk about the player boards, because there's a lot more components here. So each player has a player board in front of them. The player board is broken into a number of different sections. On the left-hand side, you have your barricades and your traps. Underneath each of these different locations, you have possible bonuses at the start of every single one of the rounds, if those are placed on the board or uncovered. You have a spot for your training grounds. These are future merry men that can be brought into your pool. You're going to start with 3 merry men right off the bat. And then finally, you have a place for your hero, and you have a place for the 5 different types of resources in the game. And of course, you're going to also have your hero card itself, which provides unique abilities.
Yeah, the hero cards provide variable powers that definitely feel very different from one another. And the resources, like Jeremy said, there's 5 resources. A lot of those are going to be used for building weapons, for a variety of different things. There's money, of course, which is going to come into play significantly in this game. And then finally, the distraction tokens. The distraction tokens are used in a number of different ways, but mostly it's used to try to avoid the sheriff and his henchmen at times.
There are merry men cards. Each player is going to start with 4 of these merry men cards. When you use these, you're going to place them either on the left or the right-hand side of your board. The left-hand side is called your passive side. Your right hand is called your active side. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then, of course, you have a bunch of different resources. The only ones I really haven't talked about are the white dice. These are the dice that your hero will roll when he's trying to rob carriages or to combat the henchmen from the sheriff. And then you have the black dice. These are used in three very distinct areas. One, for the archery grounds. 2, to rob from the rich. And then 3, to break people out of prison.
Right.
So, at the start of the game, every player is going to start with 3 workers in their pool, their hero on their player board, 1 of each of the 5 resources. They're going to draw 4 random Merryman cards, and then each player is going to draw 3 random King Richard envoy tasks. Now, these are end-of-the-game points that players can possibly score if they've met the conditions and if they've placed one of their Merrymen in the envoy spot. So, let's talk about a couple of things on the board, too, before we start. Each of the roads, now there's 4 different roads that lead into the castle. Each of these is going to start with an X amount of silver pennies, depending upon the number of players that are playing. Each road is going to have a random colored carriage placed at the very end of the road. The Sheriff of Nottingham will be in his little castle, and then you have henchmen on 2 locations in every single one of the 6 gathering sites. Then you start.
Right.
So the game is broken into 2 phases. You have a Merryman phase and you have a hero phase. They're quite different from one another. The Merryman phase is going to use your Merrymen to take actions in one of 8 different spots. And then the hero phase uses just your 1 hero, but you get 2 actions in 13 different spots. So here's how it works.
Yeah, so the Merrymen phase is the first part, and you're going to be, like Jeremy said, placing 1 Merryman at a time around the table. When you do, like I said earlier, you're not just placing a generic worker into a spot and taking a very standard action. You're going to be playing a card, and you're going to be playing this card. It's associated with that Merryman, and you're going to play it on the active side of your board or the passive side of your board. If you play it on the passive side, it's just going to simply enact the
common ability of that side.
common ability of the spot that you go to. However, if you place it on your active spot, it might juice that up a little bit. For instance, this one, if you go to the blacksmith in the active slot, you're going to be able to double the amount of resources you take from that spot.
Now, the cool thing is if you played in the passive side, you can go anywhere. It doesn't matter what's on the card itself. It's simply saying, this is a generic Merryman. I'm using this card to take one of my Merrymen and place him in that location to get a common resource from it. However, there's a difference between active and passive. If it's active, that card is going to be used to a better benefit and it's going to be discarded at the end of the round. If you played on the passive side, it gives you a couple different abilities. Number 1, it could have victory points on the card itself. Number 2, there's a set collection bonus here. If you have 2 of the same characters at the end of the game that have sat in there for the entire game, you get 3 victory points. If you have 3 of the same type, you get 5 victory points. And you have the added bonus of anytime you play a passive card, the next time it gets back around to you, you can either play a card from your hand or play one of those passive cards and move it into your active, so then you're still getting the benefit from that card.
Yeah, it's really cool because you can look at these passive cards in a couple of different ways. Like Jeremy said, 1, you can sort of stack them up and really go after points there. Or 2, you can play a card on the passive side, and then when it comes around to you, play it on the active side to basically get double or 3 times the benefit.
So let's dumb this down a little bit. What do these actual Merrymen do? You can go to a variety of different spots. If you play the passive side, you can go to any one of these 6 different resource gathering spots. These are just called gathering sites. If you play on the active side, you always go to one of the hideouts that is associated with that gathering site that allows you to get more resources. However, there is a risk of the sheriff's henchmen catching you in the hero phase. So there's risk in going and using those active sides. Now, the other very important thing about using active sides, it allows you access to spots that you typically cannot use with the passive side. And that's the locations over here on the left-hand side. Building traps, building barricades, or sending your envoy out to King Richard. The cool thing about this is that each of these requires a specific amount of resources from your player board. Now, some of these require silver pennies that you have to physically have in front of you. All the resources that you use to build any of these different tools on your player board simply go back to the supply. However, the silver pennies, if it's built for a particular road, is going to go back to that road. And if you use it for the envoy, you can place it on any of the roads. So this is how you kind of redistribute those coins back to the people.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the biggest cooperative aspects of the game, is making sure there's enough coins on all of those roads so the game doesn't end and everyone loses.
So what do the traps and the barricades do? The barricades are simply going to go into the location on where you built it. This is going to stop the carriage from progressing. We'll talk about that in the hero phase. And the traps are always go into the hideouts in any of the open hideout locations. These are going to trap the henchmen, make them captives for you so you can turn them in for victory points or bonuses through the course of the game. So, once all the players are done placing all their merry men, you then go into the hero phase. The hero phase is done differently because each player is going to do their hero phase before the next player takes theirs. Now, the hero phase has a couple different steps. The first step is you have to draw one of the sheriff cards. There's a variety of different sheriff cards. They all have different abilities, but they typically enact the sheriff to do 3 different things. The sheriff is always located in the castle at the beginning. It's going to tell him where to go. There's a number of different locations that he could spawn in. He could go to the archery grounds, or he could go to the center of the castle or one of the gathering sites. You want to try to avoid the sheriff, if at all possible. Then it's going to tell you, once you spawn that sheriff, he will always place 2 henchmen, if available, into the hideouts in those locations. So he's sending his people out to find the merry men that have been placed in the previous round. If there is a trap, guess what? That traps that guy, which is perfect. If not, it's simply going to populate those areas. If there wasn't a trap in that location and there was a merryman in that location, that merryman is then arrested.
Yeah, and the arrest is actually going to take place at the end of the round because during the hero phase, which we'll get into in a second, you have the opportunity to save any of those merry men that are in the process of being arrested.
The next thing that happens is it could possibly move, well, it will move one of the carriage roads. Now, each of these roads leads into the castle and has 1 carriage at the start of the game. All these are color coordinated because that's what you need to be able to fight them with the hero phase. However, these are going to move 1 step. If there is no barricade, it's going to simply move right into the castle, which is bad for everybody. It's then going to be placed on this track and remove silver pennies depending upon which area it's placed into. If there's a barricade there, it simply stops, and then a new one's going to spawn right behind it.
Yeah, the good news is that the barricades don't get destroyed in that respect. They can be destroyed, but usually when you put a barricade out there, it's there for good, and it's really going to slow the progress of those carriages getting into the city.
The last thing the sheriff card's going to do is it's going to spawn just 1 henchman in 1 very particular location. So again, these cards are bad. Every single person at the start of their hero phase has to play one of these. So in a 4-player game, 4 of these are going to come out, meaning that a lot of carriages are going to move, the sheriff's going to move around, and a lot of things could happen between round to round. Then you do a draft of the weapon dice.
Yeah. So you're going to draft the die at this point. There's other ways to get die, but this is the main way. And in a snake draft fashion, you're going to take 1 die at a time around to the table to the last player. They're going to take 2 and then back to the first player.
Now, there is a limit of 4 dice, so you can only have 4 of them in your pool. If you have 4 and you want to take a different color die, you simply replace it and put the 1 back into the weapon pool. Then, once that is done, the hero actually gets to take their turn. The hero is going to come off your player board, and he gets to go to one of 13 different locations. There's a whole variety of things that your hero can do. Again, any of the spots that have Robin Hood's hat are spots that you can place them. A couple rules that are associated with placing your hero. Number 1, you typically can't go into the spot where the sheriff is. It would be bad. However, if you use one of the distraction tokens, you're allowed to slip in. That's important because you may want to combat henchmen in the areas that he's in or rescue people that have been arrested by the sheriff.
Yeah, and once you're in a location with your hero, during that phase, you're actually able to do basically as much as you can at that location within that 1 action. And the other good news is you're going to get 2 actions with your hero in this phase. So once you go to 1 location and resolve whatever you might want to resolve, then you're going to go to a second location and do even more.
There's 2 things we can talk about very briefly with the hero. 1 is he can combat any of the people in those locations. Each of these different gathering sites has a specific type of die that's needed in order to combat those henchmen. When you do, you can roll any number of the dice. So if I want to fight this guy and I have 4 blue dice, I could roll all 4. You only need 1 success. Anytime you have a success, all the dice that you used get discarded. If you fail, all the dice that you use come back to you. So in this case, you may just want to use 1 dice or 2 dice. You can also, if you so wish, decide to go to one of the roads. Now, when you go to one of the roads, you want to rob the carriage in that specific area. The rules work kind of the same. Depending upon the color of the carriage, you have to use that colored dice, in this case, green. However, you always have to have at least 2 of that colored but you only need to roll 1 success.
Right. It's going to force you to collect certain dice if you want to go that route. But like Jeremy said, you just need 1 success. You're just going to be burning 2 dice.
2 things happen. If you do succeed, the carriage gets turned on its head and placed into any one of the tracks, and then you get a bonus on the left-hand side that could give you coin or resources. The second thing is this is an opportunity to score victory points. If there are barricades in the location in which you robbed, every player that has a barricade in that location is going to score 2 points for every barricade that they have. So if I put 3 barricades here and I rob a carriage, that's 6 victory points. And that's a lot in this game.
It certainly is. And this is one of the few different engines you can build in this, is put a lot of barricades out there and allow some carriages to build up and then take care of those carriages. The game has some interesting things built in to make it so you can't abuse an engine like that. So you might need to spread things out to the various roads.
A couple other things that your hero can do briefly. They can go to the archery grounds and compete. This is a way to get a lot of victory points, but it is very much a press your luck. You can get some coin from it, but the higher you press your luck, the more chances you're going to fail at it. The other thing on the right-hand side, there are times in the game where your merrymen are going to get arrested and get sent to prison. When that happens, you have the opportunity to go break them out, either your own or other players. Again, this is kind of a press your luck skill check. However, the more distraction tokens you use, the better your chances of doing so. It's a great place to score victory points too. And another part of the game that uses cooperation, because you want to break other players' merrymen out because you're getting victory points for it. Plus, when you do so, you're allowed to steal something right back from the sheriff from his stash.
Yeah, you'll find very quickly that the victory points that you score throughout the game are often associated with a lot of those cooperative aspects. Yep. Saving other guys from the jail, saving people from the different placement spots is all going to grab you victory points, as well as reputation in some cases.
Once all the players have gone through their 2 hero steps, you're going to have a cleanup phase. Anyone in prison that hasn't been broken out is going to move 1 step down. If they move off of this 3rd level, they're going to get hung, and that's -4 victory points at the end of the game. So you want to rescue those guys as quickly as possible.
And you won't get that guy back.
Yep, exactly. And you're going to do this over 5 different rounds. Hopefully, by the end of the game, you haven't had any of the roads that have no silver pennies in them, or any of the locations that you've let a lot of henchmen come into, because you're going to be managing those in hopes that the game doesn't end early, because if it does, everybody loses.
Yeah, and another really cool thing that happens during that cleanup phase is this little tile right here is associated with the henchmen that you may have captured throughout the game. Jeremy mentioned earlier building traps, and you're going to put traps in these locations. If you happen to grab a henchman that way, you're going to put them on your player board, and then during that cleanup phase, you're able to basically trade in those henchmen and get some of the rewards that are depicted on this tile.
So once the game ends and you successfully get through 5 rounds, you're going to get victory points in a variety of different ways. One of the main ways is for your envoys for King Richard. Now, King Richard, each player is going to be dealt 3 of these cards. You're not going to score these cards unless you've gone and sent one of your merrymen to the envoy location. For each merryman that you have there, you're allowed to pick any one of these cards and score it. Now, merrymen that are in this location are permanently locked in. So you're going to be giving up the opportunity to have more guys out for scoring victory points. Another way to score victory points, and a lot of victory points, is by the reputation track.
Yeah, so you're going to be moving up the reputation track in a number of different ways throughout the game, and this is where you're going to score a lot of points with these multipliers that are associated with various levels up the reputation track. These multipliers are going to be for barricades, for envoy cards, and for the traps that you've set.
And remember, you're going to score any of the points on the left side of your player board for passive cards that have sat there. As we said, some of these cards may have just straight up victory points in the bottom right-hand corner. Also, if you have set bonuses, if I had these 2 cards with the same art on them, that's worth 3 victory points. If I have 3 of these cards, that's worth 5 victory points. There's a variety of ways to get some in-game points there as well. This is a very unique game. Like, there's a lot of things going on here. If you like worker placement games, if you like thinky games, and the fact that it has 2 very distinct worker phases, so you're planning to do things in your worker phase or your merryman phase, and then those plans could change in the hero phase by the time it gets back around to you, because people could have got arrested by the sheriff, or the carriages could have moved up into a location that's going to hurt the silver pennies on a particular road.
Yeah, this game is a really unique combination of cooperative and competitive play, and it's definitely different than a lot of things we've ever seen.
So that is Robin Hood and the Merry Men from Final Frontier Games. If you guys have any questions about the game, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, everything else that we do. Go back the game, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.
Season 2 of Man vs. Meeple is sponsored in part by Cool Stuff Inc. Cool stuff in stock at coolstuffinc.com.